You know, there is another threat, if you like, to stained glass, which has caused me to appear at one of these public inquiries I was talking about. It's whether or not stained glass is a fixture or a fitting, and that's relating to whether it can be removed. And obviously, if you have a very beautiful thing like a piece of stained glass with a beautiful subject, then it has a value, and if it can be removed, there are owners who would like to remove them, but we would like them to stay in situ because of for obvious reasons. It's an integrated artwork, a piece of applied art, if you like. The other threat, of course, is redundancy of buildings that contain stained glass. And of course, this is one. And I was saying to David earlier, the setup here, which I think is wonderful, it reminds me of the early days of the Tron Theatre. So the idea of just getting in the building, occupying it, having events, pop-up events, and then using the space will build, I think, a momentum into a permanent and resilient, sustainable reuse. And this is what our last speaker, Peter Aiers, has very kindly agreed to talk to us about. Peter Aiers has led on several important historic church conversion schemes, and he's raised over £12 million since joining the Church's Conservation Trust in 2007, which is a fantastic achievement. He's going to speak to us about the mechanics and outcomes of successful church conversions. So, Peter, if you would. Thank you. Thanks.
The first lesson of the Alf Webster Conference is taken from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, verse 12. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know, even as also I am known. Now, because you're all good theologians, I know that you know Paul's talking about the nature of God and how man addresses him. But in this more secular age, I think this particular passage has something to say about how we appreciate the historic church building itself. I hope you thought that that's a Bible, really, because I'm trying to deliberately mislead you. That is not a Bible. And this is to demonstrate why I think that the historic parish church is the best record of a place. There is nothing like the parish church to describe the story of the place in which you find it. And this particular book here is actually a book called An Apology in Defence of the Church of England. And it was written by Bishop Jewell, the Bishop of Salisbury, in 1562 as a defence against England removing itself from Rome, so separating from the Catholic Church. The huge irony, this is in a church in just outside a city called Milton Keynes in England, which you might have heard of. Milton Keynes is a new city. But what's great about this story is that this particular church is in a village called Broughton, and Broughton has been enveloped by this new city with a lot of roundabouts in it and lots of boulevards. But here is the remnants of this medieval setup. And what's also great about this particular church is that underneath the Reformation whitewash is actually the most phenomenal collection of 15th century wall paintings, which describe the story of which the apology is fighting against. Why did we whitewash all over it? So you've got the why we whitewashed all over the walls, and then underneath you've still got the paintings there telling the story. Now this tells a story of international politics, but also it reflects on people's everyday real lives. And in particular, there is this particularly important warning about the issues of swearing oaths on Christ's body. It was obviously a very pertinent issue in the 15th century, because what you've got here on this particular painting is some very fashionably dressed young men. You can see them at the bottom. And what it's warning against is when you actually swear an oath on Christ's body, for instance, if I were to say, by Christ's foot, isn't Alf Webster's conference great? It would actually physically affect Christ. And there's his foot. His foot would come off. This is to stop you swearing because it actually affects Christ himself. And these are the stories that are obviously important to local people, but they're related to this idea of international significance as well, with the Church of Rome and how it's explained to people and how these buildings are used. And of course, you've got to remember in the medieval period, this is pictorial evidence. They were the buildings, if you would go into them nowadays, we probably think they were incredibly vulgar, but they're telling a story. They're reinforcing a message, and you've always got to avoid the jaws of hell. There's always a doom painting there somewhere. But the parish church also is very important where it remains. So this particular church is in a village called Imber, and Imber is on Salisbury Plain. Do you see how I linked the Bishop of Salisbury to Salisbury Plain now? I thought that was quite good. The village of Imber, you can visit this 3 times a year. You could go other times during the year, but you might well be shelled by the British Army, which is not a good thing and highly unrecommended. And if they caught you, you'd be arrested for trespassing because it's a military area. And this village was requisitioned, taken over as a military training camp. And the only building that really survives is the church building itself. There are some buildings left of the village, but they've all been converted into training centres for fighting in urban settings and villages across the world. But the church is still there because it's such a significant building. The memorials are still there of the people gone past, and people still go back to Imber who have a relationship with that place. Their families still live there. There's still a contest between the families who were evicted because they still think they was robbed by the Ministry of Defence, and it's still a pertinent issue, and it's still there today. I just wanted to show you this as well because I felt I ought to address the issues of stained glass at least once in my conversation with you today. This is All Saints, Cambridge. This is one of the finest works by a Victorian architect called George Frederick Bodley. And what's particularly amazing about this again tells the story of a place, but again tells you the story of international, national and local contexts. This building was built on the wealth of the empire, particularly pertinent. There was a lot of church building going on in the mid to late 19th century as urban areas expanded, and this is a sign of progress, yet it's a Gothic architecture. The Gothic architecture relates back to a national view. The Gothic was the only true Christian architecture, and so suddenly you get this great Gothic revival linked to all the pre-Raphaelites and those who came before. Now, this building is highly decorated in the interior. It's part of, I love this because this is a true expression of the Oxford movement, and it's in Cambridge. But although the Oxford movement started from the Cambridge Society, it's all very confusing. But in the end, it's all about high church. It's the Church of England being more Catholic in how it shows. But the stained glass window in the east end of the church is particularly interesting, and it's interesting on several levels. And this is again this layer of stories. I'm looking through a glass darkly. You of course would just see, well, of course, because you're also very clever, you would see St. Peter in front of you. But as you reveal it face to face, this is actually William Morris. And this is very important because William Morris is actually designed and executed this particular stained glass window. And William Morris, as you will know, hugely important in the world of conservation and very important in saving many historic church buildings in particular. And here he is, given a commission by his friend, Bodley, to do this work. Now, Morris & Co. got most of its early commissions from George Frederick Bodley. This is also very important because they fell out at some point, and Bodley set up Watts & Co. Watts & Co. is still with us. It still exists as a company, whereas Morris & Co. doesn't. It just shows that Bodley was the important bit there. I was actually at the Watts & Co. Outlet, which is just behind Church House in Westminster, just the other day. An amazing shop, actually. Incredible. So, enough of my frivolity about why historic churches are important and how historic parish churches are important. And it's about the fact that these buildings, I think, are for everybody. They tell the story of everybody. They're the most democratic historic building there is. In the Church of England, certainly, when a vicar or a rector takes on a parish, they're given the responsibility for the cure of souls. And the cure of souls applies to absolutely everybody, regardless of whether you believe in Christ, regardless of what gender, race, orientation you are, it doesn't matter. That cure of souls applies to you. Therefore, one could stretch that the parish church is there for you. And it is. It's genuinely a public building. It is the original public building. In fact, they're so democratic that when church wardens were first brought to the fore in the Middle Ages, women were allowed to be elected as church wardens, which shows a very progressive movement at that time, I think. And so these buildings in particular, have I moved on a stage there? Sorry. So these buildings are very, very important. So what happens when they fall out of use? And it's a very tragic thing. The Christian use sometimes works to exclude everybody else from these buildings. In the medieval period, they were used a lot more for a lot more things because they were basically the best public building there was. And they had a wide variety of uses. And over time, lots of buildings they've become, in England certainly, the Victorians did a lot to make these buildings really religious. And it put a lot of people off. And they become very sacred spaces, very refined and very reserved. And they're only effectively used on the Sunday. So what do you do to try and get them? And in an age where there's population demographic shift, and there is also this challenge of people actually believing anymore, we were left with this amazing legacy of buildings without a use. So the Church Conservation Trust was set up in 1969 as a genuine partnership between church and state in England to look after what they thought would be an amazing flood of redundancies as everyone would stop going to church at exactly the same time. That has never happened. What actually has happened is that there's been a pretty steady trickle. So since 1969, we've collected 347 historic churches across England. And we look after those. We conserve them to an extremely high standard, and we open the doors, and we really encourage the public to use them. They remain consecrated, so they are religious spaces, but we encourage as wide a use as possible for those. And we work very hard on balancing the nature of the building, and you can't ignore the fact that they're religious buildings, with the community aspects of it as well, to not exclude anybody. Yep, it sounds mad, doesn't it? It is quite difficult to do, but it's very important to bear those things in mind. So this example here is in the city of Bristol, possibly about as far as you can get from Scotland, I suppose. Not quite, but it's St Paul's, Bristol. In the 70s, there were lots of riots in St Paul's, a very deprived area. The whole area was actually cut off by a brilliant ring road. We're really good in English cities about cutting off areas of cities with big roads and creating effectively ghettos, which is what happened in St Paul's. And the symbol of St Paul's is this very fine 18th century church, early 19th century church, which fell out of use. And it was a brilliant place to go and buy drugs or acquire prostitutes, apparently. That was about the limit of what it was used for. And this was one of the early project that the Church's Conservation Trust found to look at its long-term sustainability. And as you've already had a sneak preview because it's already there, it's now actually been repaired with the help of the Heritage Lottery Fund and changed into a circus school. So this is a place where people train to become trapeze artists. I'm sure you've all seen Cirque du Soleil and things like that. Well, those people have to train somewhere, so why not in a fantastic historic church? I wish my slides would stop doing that. Like this, it's in a very open space. And the impact on the fabric is absolutely minimal. There are about 7 or 8, well, maybe a few more than that. There's about 10 holes drilled through the plasterwork, and the whole of that frame is supported off the existing roof. It's quite an incredible structure above. So the impact on the space is very, very limited, and it also has a wider use because it's actually able to be used for functions and events as well. So it's got that supporting infrastructure. I think they've been in there 9-10 years now, and we're developing the site further with the circus school, Circa Media they're called, who operate out of that building. Now it takes quite a lot of negotiation. This was a very early project for the Church's Conservation Trust, and we weren't, am I allowed to say this contractually? We weren't really sure what we were doing. It was a way of working with the building, and we were finding our way. Since then, we face the same thing that Heritage faces across the country at the moment. How do you actually pay for all of these buildings? 347 historic churches is quite a number to look after, and with a very considerably declining set of statutory sources of income from the government and from the Church of England, we've been looking really hard about what we do with these buildings, and because we think there's a need for the work we do. We're passionate about historic churches. We think they're there for everybody. We don't want them to be lost, because one of the other issues of everyone not going to church anymore or not having any form of formal engagement with an historic church building is that they become irrelevant and people don't understand what they are, and they tend to go and visit them, well, if they do visit them at all, because there's a big issue about getting through the door in the first place. They'll open the door, they'll go and have a look, and they'll go, there's a font, there's an altar, there's some lovely stained glass. You guys would do that. There's some lovely stained glass. It's a church, I'm off. So what we've been trying very hard to do is work out how we get people to engage and stay longer in these buildings, to try and scratch under the surface. So you're not looking through a glass darkly, you're actually engaging and seeing the building face to face and how important it is about that place. So we've been working on a project recently where we're investing in a number of key sites in city centres, town centres, where there's high footfall, in something we internally call our gateway churches, to improve the interpretation in these buildings, really engage a volunteer workforce and look at ways of people staying longer. So here we are in Norwich, in St John's Mad Market, where we have got, it's amazing, it's a picture of a church with people in it. Everyone takes pictures of churches without people in them, so it's really good. And they're not actually listening to me eulogize, it's about us launching this event, and we've improved the interpretation. People stay longer, people have a better visitor experience, and they leave more money when they go. And we're also providing ways for them to spend their money as well. So in the town of Shrewsbury, which is St Mary's Church, right in the centre of town, a fabulous Jesse window at the east end of this building. You really have to go and see that if you're interested in stained glass. But while you're there, do go and stop into this lovely cafe which is there, which sells a great range of locally produced products. And the point is, it's nicely tucked away in the building, but again, it generates the kind of revenue that really helps keep this building sustainable in the long term. And people stay longer and they appreciate the building more. And also, in this particular church, this is the first one that we have experimented with a retail outlet as well, which is very problematic. Before you leap into thinking that retail is a solution to all your funding problems, please think a moment before you do it. It is not easy to deliver, but it does affect the visitor experience. And the visitor experience is directly related to how much money people give you as well. So here's our chairman, Lloyd Grossman, who you may know. I assume you do know him, especially if you like pasta sauce. I'm sure you've come across him. But he's a huge advocate of the heritage industry. He's also the chair of the Heritage Alliance, and he's done a wonderful job for us as chair. Sadly, we're going to lose him as our chairman next year, but he's been absolutely brilliant. But here he is in a retail outlet in the same place that I showed you, and a range of products, which this demonstrates my issue about what you choose to sell. So I'm sure that you're all gasping. I've got some in my bag if you want to buy them. CCT mugs, CCT blanket and a CCT flask. Choosing the right product for the right place is really important. That's all I'll say about those things to improve your spend per head. So moving on to some bigger projects. The important thing is about people visiting and people engaging with this. So this is a site in a town called Bolton in England, obviously, and this is All Souls. This sits in the heart of an 85% Asian Muslim community. There are 3 mosques within a 250-metre radius of this church. It's been like that since the sort of mid to late 80s, when this particular church closed, was passed to the Church Conservation Trust. The first time I visited this site, in the previous year, there had been 1 visitor in the guidebook. The local kids have been practicing how to start fires, and we'd been propping up the local economy by supplying lead to the local people. It was obviously a building that had fallen out of use. It seemed to be irrelevant. This is my point about understanding what you've got. It seemed to be irrelevant. It's a church in the middle of a Muslim community. But actually, when you start looking at it, we were approached by this fantastic bloke locally called Ina Amaji. He's a true local hero, this man. And he approached the Church Conservation Trust and he said, "You've got this amazingly big building sat right in the heart of my community and people are setting fire to it. Do you think we ought to do something about that?" And we went, yeah, we've been really struggling because there was something like a £1.5 million repair bill for this particular church. It's enormous. £1.5 million repair bill would have bankrupted us if we'd have just done that. So we had to find a way to create something which would enable the building to not only be repaired, raise the money to do that, but also for it to be sustainable in the long term whilst engaging the local community. And this is what we built. We've put an amazing piece of 21st century architecture in the interior of this building. Now, this might be divisive. You might hate it. You might love it. It's a kind of, I suppose, a tired old thing, but it's a bit of a Marmite thing. But the point is that we've used very high quality 21st century design to create something that is now an extremely useful resource in this particular community. The community itself sits in a very deprived area. It's one of the most deprived in that particular, in the town of Bolton and actually in the country overall. And we've made a £4.5 million investment in that particular community. This community would never get a £4.5 million investment in any other way, only because it's got a grade 2-star listed building in the middle of it that we've provided something of huge quality for that local community to use. They run the trust that looks after this building. They've taken a lease from us to look after it, and it's now used as a conferencing facility, and it's also used as office space for startups and other charities, and there's an amazing cafe in it. Now, my children, bless their souls, are very bored of going to churches because they go to a lot of churches, and the majority of them are really cold, and I think they're really interesting, and I'm trying to get them to think they're really interesting. But I took them here when we finished, and my family, and I've set the bar far too high because you can now get waffles and ice cream in this particular church. So I've ruined their experience of what happens. And they're very disappointed when we're in the middle of a field in a little church somewhere that there's no waffles and ice cream. But here you can see it suddenly becomes a vibrant place where there's lots of people around, lots of activity going on, and it's generating money for that local economy as well as for looking after itself. And that building can now take care of itself. It's no mean feat, though. It took us around 10 years to do it. But with that little bit of effort, that building is now safe for the future. It's also a way of thinking laterally about how you can use spaces in the short term as well. I like to show this because this is kind of one of the coolest things that ever happened in one of our churches. You will, of course, recognise Peter Hook from New Order, or previously of Joy Division. A very fine band. Well, I think they're great anyway. I'm very, very impressed. But Peter Hook played the whole of the Joy Division back catalogue in one of our churches in Macclesfield, which is just the most incredible thing to happen. But again, you might think I'm being frivolous, but it all relates back to place. Do you know that Ian Curtis, the singer of Joy Division, was a Macclesfield lad? He grew up in Macclesfield. He lived there. The reason that Peter Hook is playing this gig, which sold out in minutes in this particular church, is because it's in Macclesfield. Again, the building is an anchor. It's about that sense of place. Here's another site of ours in Ipswich. This is a medieval church with one of the finest double hammer beam roofs in the country. It's a truly stunning building. It's had a very checkered past. It's sort of it's risen up and it's fallen down. That's just with the medieval period, and then in the 19th century, it was really struggling. Then there was lots of money invested in it. Then it declined again, and it was flooded with sewage. And the Victorians raised the money again, and they inserted. There was a reference to this earlier. They inserted a newfangled product called concrete on the floor. That'll solve the problem, they thought. New technology. Brilliantly, it did for some time, until we realised that actually all of those columns, I don't know if you can see the detail, are actually crumbling to dust because of the efflorescence caused by the fact that the water cannot evaporate across the whole space of the floor of the church. It goes up the columns, wicks up there, and effloresces out there, and the columns are falling down. So a 15th century church falling down. It's again the same repair problem. It also got bombed in the war. The Germans had a go at it too. And it had been used very successfully by the Boys Brigade, who'd used it as a centre, and then that fell out of use in the 70s, and we picked it up. We'd done quite a lot of repair work to it, but again, the problem with the floor was too big to solve. Millions of pounds is required to take up a floor like that and solve this particular salting problem, which is causing the building to fall down. So in this particular case, we actually went out to advert and said, we're looking for people to work with us to find a long-term use for this particular church. You'd be surprised, we had several, I was surprised, we had several people approach us, two of which were incredibly credible, and one of which was extremely incredible, which was a local mental health charity called Suffolk Mind. And what they were interested in, and what they still are interested in, was the interface of mental health and historic and people. Because when I say mental health, most people assume acute mental health, people who are completely mad. And it's a real problem for people working in mental health charities, because there's been a lot of push recently in the press. You'll have seen a lot of people pushing on these issues around mental health, but there is a big stigma around it. And what they wanted to do was to provide a space where mental health was something that we all have to address. Stress is about mental health. And depression, very mild forms of depression, is about mental health. And they wanted to break down the barriers about mental health stigma and create a space where it was open and people could feel better about themselves. And what better way to do that with a beautiful medieval church? Well, we certainly think so. And so we've been working, and we've raised around £5 million to build this. It's on site at the moment. I will show you when it's finished. It'll be finished later next year, in the summer next year. And what we've done here is we're creating a well-being centre. So it's not about treating acute mental health. It's about a place where you can go and you can feel better about everything. So inside there'll be a lot about the heritage of the waterfront in Ipswich. There's a complementary therapy centre going to be on the side, and that's the economic driver. So you can go there. There'll be a range of complementary therapies, all supplied by local practitioners, and that's how we're going to generate the cash for the building. But it's also available for parties. So if you want to have a party in Ipswich, you give us a call afterwards, okay? It's going to be open in the summer, well, maybe the autumn next year. But it's, again, a great use for the building, because, again, there's several things that we're doing here. We're actually consciously linking the issues of mental health to the refurbishment of this particular building. Did you know that doing puzzles that use both sides of your both of your hands is really good for you? Mentally, it's very, very good for you, apparently, because you're using both hands. You're using both sides of your brain at the same time, which is a really good thing in terms of your mental health. So, on the tables in the cafe in this particular church, we will have models of the double hammer beam roof. So not only will you be able to work out how to build a double hammer beam roof, but you're also, by doing that, actually taking care of yourself. Also, one of the issues around mental health is we as human beings have quite a need to know where we are and where our place is. And this takes me back to that point about this particular church is rooted. It tells the story of that place. And by using that, we can help people as well with their mental health, not issues, but with their mental health, with our mental health, with my mental health. It really helps. A lot of what we do as well is we try and engage volunteers to help us. We have a small staff for the work that we do, but we have about 2,000 volunteers as well. And our focus is really to enable those volunteers to take care of these buildings. It's very hard to look after them remotely. So we have this little diagram which shows you this journey that we like to take our churches on, from where the church building itself is dependent on us to where it becomes this live community resource. And we all have a role to play in how those buildings can develop. And it's a very useful sort of demonstration of how you can get people involved. And there's lots of different ways of doing it, but that's the thing. The door's got to be open. People have got to be allowed to come in. The more they come in, the more they care, the more activity they do. And it does roll like that. You have to kind of help and chivvy along, but it does help. one other thing we do to try and get people engaged and involved is, again, going back to my experience of opening the church door, having a quick look round. If you've opened the door, a lot of people don't even bother to open the door, have a quick look around, there's an altar, there's a font, is they go in and they'll stand around and they'll look around, and then they're not quite sure how to interact with the space. So we've been working quite hard on finding ways to get people to feel comfortable in a particular building. One of the things we've done here is climb up and read aloud. We ran a competition to get people to go up into the pulpit and to speak. And we had a series of speeches ready, and we got people to film themselves on their phones and submit them to our Vimeo channel. And the winner got to go and see the Lion King in the West End. Was really good. Now, again, it's not the sort of thing you'd expect from a historic church visit, but the point is to get people to interact. If you go up into the pulpit, you start to begin to realise why it's there and what it's for. If you're getting people to, we had some great diagrams about how to use your diaphragm to project as well. You start to realise the power of what you're doing and how the building works and how it's shown to be working. Another piece we did, we like to kind of try and shock people every now and again, is in a small church in the middle of the Northamptonshire countryside. The church itself is very pretty. Well, a lot of people think that churches have always been in good repair throughout history, and it's only now we're letting them go. The irony is, of course, that parish churches are probably in the best state they've ever been in, although there are big repair bills to do. But there's this beautiful church in Northamptonshire where the story is that in the Elizabethan period it had fallen into rack and ruin, and the local manor house used the chancel to house their greyhounds, and the tower was in fact a dovecot, a pigeon loft for winter meat. So what we've done is we've actually put some greyhounds in the chancel that bark when you go in. So there's an infrared sensor, and so you go into the chancel and the barking starts, and then there's some beautifully painted greyhounds in the chancel sitting there on some straw. And then if you go into the tower, the cooing starts of the pigeons, and above your head are about 30 beautifully painted pigeons by the local primary school that spin round gently, that's set off by a PIR. Now, the point of doing this is not, again, to be completely frivolous, but you will learn something about it. You're not looking through the glass darkly. You are, in fact, seeing it face to face, and you're learning a particularly interesting thing about that building. Now, another important thing about historic churches is how you get people to dwell and how do you get different audiences to engage with it. So, we've invented a whole new tourism concept. And this tourism concept stems from, you've all been camping. No doubt all of you have been glamping, but now you can go champing, okay? Champing is in fact church camping, and we've pioneered this particular product. This year, it's been a huge success. We've had press coverage across the world, and I do not lie. Every major UK newspaper has covered it. Well, not the Scottish ones, actually, but there's room, you see, this year for that. Every English newspaper has, and we've been in the New York Times. Even newspapers in the Lebanon have covered this. It is quite incredible. And we've had over 300 people stay in our buildings. Now, the point of this is there's a lot of people out there who are after experiences. And you know what I was saying before about absorbing the particular building? Now, champing actually gives you that opportunity to do it. People come here without any preconception about it. But actually what they're doing is they're spending time in these beautiful and unique buildings, a time that they would never normally be there because they're spending their time overnight. So they get to stay in this building. They're all candle lit, as you can see, and there's no facilities. There's no running water. There's no electricity. But there is a fabulous composting loo in the vestry. And there's tea and coffee making facilities, and we deliver breakfast in the morning. And the point here, this particular church, again in Northamptonshire, is Aldwinkle. Every year, with the doors open all year round, every summer, and for the last 4 years, every year we've made around £250 out of the wall safe income. That's the donations that people leave in the building. This year, we've made near £400 out of the wall safe, which is interesting, isn't it? Because the majority of weekends this year, we've had people champing. And we've made nearly £5,000 out of doing this particular thing. Now, what's amazing about it is we can take all of that away. Nothing is touched. The fabric of the building is not touched. It's cleared away, and it becomes a historic church just as a historic church again. There's very little footprint. There's very little overhead. but yet you can do something creative to allow people to enjoy these phenomenal buildings. And I'm going to end on that. You all, of course, can book, because we'll be launching our new website in January, and I'm expecting you all to stay. And we're also very interested in people who are interested in doing it. We own the trademark, and we're happy to share our marketing for a fee. It's a beautiful thing. Well, thank you all very much for coming, and that's all.